They laughed when he took in 5 orphans, until the dying millionaire changed their lives. Forever. The room was completely silent, save for the soft ticking of a grandfather clock. Its sound unfamiliar, almost intrusive. Alexander Morgan sat at the edge of a leather armchair that probably cost more than an average family's annual income. His knuckles were white, clutching a thin sheet of medical paper. His name printed at the top. The rest was worse than silence. He had 90 days. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. Not until something happened. Until nothing ever would again. No cure, no appeals, no time. The cancer was aggressive and unusually resistant to treatment. His team of private doctors had delivered the news with solemn efficiency, then exited like professional mourners. No one lingered. They never did. Alexander had conquered financial markets, governments, and entire industries. He had bent entire sectors to his will. But he had never built a family. Never trusted anyone long enough. His life had been a campaign, not a journey. And now, what? The war was over? That night, for the first time in decades, he left the tower. Not in disguise, not in a convoy. Just walked out. No destination. No agenda. He wandered the lower districts of the city, a place his empire had helped restructure. And then he saw them. 5 shadows under the shattered roof of an abandoned parking garage. They moved like a unit, watching him but not approaching, until one of them stepped forward. He was maybe 15, maybe less. Sharp eyes, spine straight, but his voice calm and polite. "You lost, sir." Alexander said nothing, just stared. There was no fear in the boy's expression, only calculation. Within minutes, the others appeared from the shadows. 2 identical twins, maybe 13. One held what looked like the disassembled core of a stolen vending machine. Another, older, carried a sketch pad filled with technical drawings and street scenes. The smallest boy, maybe 10, sat cross-legged by a crate of tools, wrapping a wire around a syringe with unnerving precision. He hadn't meant to say it. "Would you like to come up to my place for the night?" The boys exchanged looks, wariness, suspicion, but also hunger. Not just for food, for the chance, the risk. They came. The penthouse of Alexander Morgan was like a different planet. The boys walked in silently. No wide eyes, no excited gasps. They analyzed. "I'm Ethan," said the oldest boy. "The twins are Thomas and Tyler. The sketch pad belongs to Lucas, and that's Dylan. He doesn't talk much." "And you?" Ethan asked. "I'm the man who's dying," Alexander answered flatly. There was a long pause. "Then you have time for one good idea before it's over," Ethan said. That night, none of them slept. By morning, Alexander expected them to vanish, but they didn't. They were up before him. The twins were in the utility room, designing what looked like a wireless diagnostic scanner from kitchen parts. Dylan was using the penthouse medkit to analyze blood samples under a makeshift microscope. Lucas had already sketched out the city's drainage system from memory and highlighted areas where orphaned minors were likely to hide. Ethan was waiting by Alexander's desk. "You don't know what to do with your empire," he said. "But we do. Let us stay. 3 months is just enough." Alexander hesitated. "What do you want from me?" Ethan smiled, not arrogantly, just with certainty. "Not your money, just your name, for now." Later that week, the board of Morgan Global Holdings received a formal memo. Alexander Morgan had legally adopted 5 minors. The response was swift and savage. The media called it delusion. Twitter exploded. Op-eds accused him of having lost his mind. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about Daddy Warbucks and the hacker orphans. His senior advisor, Julian Pike, tried to stage a soft intervention. "You understand how this looks? You've brought in 5 unknowns. They could be con artists." "They're not," Alexander said. "You've known them, what, 4 days? They're the only people in this building who haven't lied to me." One night, he walked into the main lounge. All 5 were gathered around the screen, not watching cartoons, but analyzing encrypted market data feeds Alexander didn't know were still active. "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't look up. "Building something. We'll show you when it's ready." Lucas added, "It's going to change everything." Alexander didn't ask more. He just stood there, letting something unfamiliar spread through his chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't hope. It was the beginning of faith. By the second week, Alexander's penthouse no longer resembled a place of wealth. It resembled a war room. The dining table was buried under circuit boards, documents, and screens displaying live financial data. The sound system had been converted into a distributed processing hub. The art collection, safely packed away to make room for something more valuable. A chalkboard wall with formulas no hedge fund could decipher. Alexander watched it all unfold from the edges of his own world, unsure whether he was host or hostage. But every day he grew more certain of one thing: they were not playing. One evening, after a long silence, Alexander finally asked what had been circling his mind since they arrived. "How do you know so much?" Ethan didn't blink. "We learn fast." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get right now." There was no rebellion in his voice, only focus. The press couldn't resist the story. Dying tycoon adopts street savants. Morgan's madness, inside the bizarre final days of a billionaire. Genius kids or sophisticated scammers. On the surface, the coverage was mocking, almost theatrical. But beneath it, corporate insiders were seething. Investors panicked. The board scheduled an emergency session. Shares trembled. The world smelled blood. Julian Pike, once Alexander's closest advisor, stormed into the penthouse with a legal packet in hand. "Alexander, this has to stop. This little social experiment of yours is tanking your legacy. And you're giving these boys, these unvetted minors, unrestricted access to your systems." Alexander looked him in the eye. "Do you know what they've done in 2 weeks?" Julian sneered. "Probably installed a virus. They've created a statistical model that predicted the last 4 commodity price swings with 98% accuracy. They've identified 3 inefficiencies in our supply chain that our consultants missed for years. And Dylan, the youngest, reverse-engineered your anti-intrusion protocol while drawing with a pen in his mouth." Julian went pale. "You're letting children run your empire." Alexander stood. "No, I'm finally letting someone competent do it." Each of the boys had a role. Ethan was the strategist. He read people like spreadsheets. He saw consequences before they happened. Alexander once caught him playing chess against 3 different AI engines, simultaneously, blindfolded. Thomas and Tyler, the twins, were engineers of chaos. They disassembled and rebuilt one of the penthouse security drones, using only parts from the kitchen and an old electric toothbrush. Then they reprogrammed it to deliver fresh coffee every morning without prompting. Lucas, the artist, had drawn a detailed sketch of Alexander's entire office network topology from memory. After seeing it once, his notebooks were filled with city blueprints, electrical maps, and portraits of the other boys that captured emotion better than any camera. And Dylan, quiet, wide-eyed Dylan had rewritten a cancer diagnostic protocol based on Alexander's medical files. His version, though crude, correctly identified molecular markers that even Alexander's top oncologists had missed. The company board voted to initiate a review of Alexander's mental competency, a quiet mutiny. They framed it as a routine wellness procedure. But the media caught wind. Suddenly, the boys weren't just a curiosity. They were a threat. Protesters gathered outside the tower. Supporters and critics shouted through megaphones. One group held signs, "Let the kids run it." Another, "Stop the fraud." But Alexander didn't budge. He called a press conference. For the first time in years, he stood before the world not to pitch a product or announce a merger, but to defend 5 children. "They are not an experiment. They are my family," reporters shouted. "Is this about guilt, Mr. Morgan? Are you dying? Are you being manipulated?" He looked straight at the camera. "I have built walls around myself for 50 years. These 5 children did not break through them. They walked through because they saw something still alive inside. If that's weakness, I accept it." No more questions. That night, the boys revealed something new. They had created the early prototype of what they called the Phoenix Protocol, a triple framework system, a market prediction algorithm that used real-time global trends and human behavior cues, a medical analysis engine built from open-source data, repurposed for targeted treatment design, and an ethical governance model, which redistributed corporate power based not on ownership, but on contribution and social utility. Alexander stared at the screen for a long time. "This isn't a legacy," he finally whispered. "It's a revolution." In a penthouse across the city, a man watched the press conference replay on mute. Curtis Lawson, former protege, now corporate enemy #1. He smiled as Alexander defended the boys, not because he admired it, but because he finally saw his opening. He dialed a secure line. "Activate our contact inside. Tell her it's time." It was 2 in the morning when Ethan woke Alexander. "Get up. You need to see this." Alexander, still weakened from his latest treatment cycle, struggled to sit upright. The pain in his chest had become sharper, more present, but Ethan's tone left no room for delay. They entered the secure lab the boys had assembled in what used to be Alexander's private library. Now, every shelf was filled with servers, processors, tablets, cables, and at the center, one screen, a single name pulsed on it. The Phoenix Protocol. Ethan began calmly, like a scientist delivering a report. "It's divided into 3 segments. We'll explain each. But first, the goal. It's not just to cure you. It's to prove that an ethical system of intelligence, created by outsiders, can outperform any structure the world has ever trusted." Alexander stared at the screen. "You want to beat the world." "No," Ethan replied. "We want to change what it rewards." Thomas and Tyler took over. "We've trained an adaptive algorithm using a network of behavioral inputs, not just financial metrics," said Tyler. "Everything from satellite traffic patterns to online search spikes. It doesn't just watch, it anticipates." Thomas added, "It's already achieved over 98% accuracy on predicting fluctuations in commodity prices, corporate stock behavior before quarterly earnings, and even political responses to economic policies. We call it ECHO because it listens, always." Alexander was stunned. This could wipe out every hedge fund on the planet. Tyler smirked. "Good." Dylan stepped forward quietly, holding a tablet. He tapped the screen, and a three-dimensional model of Alexander's body appeared, mapped down to molecular detail. "This is you," Ethan explained on Dylan's behalf. "Every blood marker, every mutation." Dylan built a comparison engine against global oncology data, creating theoretical treatments based on immunotherapy, tailored cellular responses, and synthetic gene re-editing. Alexander blinked. "Gene editing? You're 10. Dylan finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "I just copied what worked and corrected what didn't." It wasn't modesty. It was fact. Alexander sat back, overwhelmed. "You're suggesting we bypass the regulatory process? Go straight to experimental treatment?" "No," Ethan said. "We already did." Now it was Lucas's turn. He approached the board and unrolled a blueprint-like sheet. "We rewrote your company's operational charter," he said, "using systems from nonprofit models, open-source movements, and decentralized voting structures." The proposal was radical. 30% of net profits redirected into transparent social development projects. 50% of board seats allocated not by wealth or tenure, but by proven experience in education, public health, or social work. A rotating youth council of under 25-year-olds, serving one-year terms, to vote on innovation policy. Alexander shook his head in disbelief. "This would destroy my company." "No," Ethan replied. "It will destroy the old one, and create something new." That same morning, in a quiet corner of the office, Eleanor, Alexander's longtime secretary, was downloading files. She moved quickly. She'd been with Alexander for over a decade. She knew his passwords, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Curtis Lawson had promised her a future. "Do this," he said, "and you'll never have to work again." Eleanor hesitated only once, when she saw Dylan's medical simulations, but she told herself it was just data. Nothing real. She transmitted it to Curtis through a secure channel. Done. Back in the lab, the boys were finishing their presentation. Then Ethan smiled. A rare, slightly cruel smile. "We should mention one more thing," he said. Thomas pulled up a second interface. "You know how you warned us that someone inside the company might try to betray us?" Alexander nodded slowly. "Well," Tyler said, "we left them something." They brought up a clone of the system Eleanor had downloaded. It looked real, impressive, and completely false. "We fed it deliberately corrupted algorithms," said Lucas. "Fake medical protocols. Disinformation wrapped in real data. Whoever takes it and uses it will fail. Publicly." Alexander stared at them in disbelief. "You baited them." Ethan folded his arms. "It's not revenge. It's insulation. Now, even betrayal is part of the plan." By noon the next day, Curtis Lawson had the files. He gathered his top scientists and engineers. They tore through the data. They praised it, called it brilliant. They didn't suspect a thing. He called a press conference of his own, promising the release of the next generation of market and medical tech. Within 48 hours, his trial simulations collapsed. The data was wrong. The markets reacted violently. His investors panicked, and someone leaked the truth. He'd acquired the data from an internal mole. Curtis Lawson's empire began to bleed. But not all was celebration. Alexander collapsed during breakfast. The boys rushed to him. Dylan scanned his vitals. The cancer had reached critical progression. The protocols weren't just an idea anymore. They were the only option left. That night, they administered the first dose of the Phoenix therapy, a mix of tailored immunoagents and cellular reprogrammers. Illegal. Unapproved, experimental, but necessary. Alexander's body shook violently. Fever, seizure, silence. For 2 days, he hovered between life and death. The world outside waited for news. Inside, 5 children sat in shifts by his side, refusing to sleep. And then, on the 3rd morning, Alexander opened his eyes. He spoke just one word. Live. Curtis Lawson's empire didn't collapse all at once. For predators like him, failure was not a fall. It was a slow uncoiling. He denied everything, blamed rogue employees, sued for defamation. But the damage had begun. And behind it all, one name circulated quietly among media leaks and boardroom whispers: Eleanor Grace. She had vanished the day after the leak. No resignation. No goodbye. She knew better than to stay. Morgan Tower was no longer the sanctuary it once was. And Alexander, if he survived, would not forget. But Alexander did survive. On the morning of the 5th day, after the Phoenix treatment began, he rose from his bed with no assistance. No wheelchair, no oxygen. His skin was pale, but his voice was clear. The scans showed something his doctors could barely believe: remission indicators. It was a miracle, yes. But more than that, a proof of concept. The morning Alexander returned to the boardroom, silence fell. Not just because of his recovery, but because of who stood beside him. Ethan, in a clean suit. Not oversized, not comical. Tailored. Composed. "I'm assigning Ethan as my acting proxy," Alexander announced. The room erupted. "He's a minor. He's not qualified. This violates every operational statute." Alexander raised a hand. "According to new provisions filed under the emergency charter last quarter, a charter you all approved, any acting board member may designate a qualified strategist during medical leave." "You weren't on leave." "I was dying," Alexander said, flatly. "Now I'm not." They had no argument. The boys didn't just defend themselves. They advanced. Ethan presented a new package of reforms during his first appearance as board proxy. 30% of Morgan Global profits would now be set aside into a transparent social impact trust, managed independently. 50% of all strategic planning positions would be filled by candidates from education, healthcare, or nonprofit fields. A rotating internship program would open every quarter for underprivileged youth across the country to shadow and learn real decision-making. The vote was narrow, but it passed because shareholders had seen something no analyst could quantify: hope translated into returns. After Alexander's death sentence reversed, stock rebounded 30%. The media, once mocking, now called it the miracle turnaround. The kids weren't a liability anymore. They were the future. But the future has enemies. One night, an encrypted message reached Ethan's tablet. Unknown sender. One line: "I know where she is. She still has access. Don't underestimate her." Eleanor wasn't done. She'd disappeared, yes, but she had burned copies of the Phoenix data. She was trying to sell it again. This time, not to Curtis, but to a foreign conglomerate known for laundering tech into black markets. If it reached them, even the decoy protocols could be weaponized. Ethan called a meeting with the others. "We let her walk once. We don't get that luxury again." Thomas and Tyler tracked the message source to an old server in Berlin. Lucas decrypted the connection logs. Dylan identified that one of the Phoenix test compounds had been tampered with. Remotely, it hadn't reached production. But the implications were dangerous. "She's trying to reverse engineer it," Dylan whispered. Alexander listened in silence, then said something that surprised even the boys. Let her succeed, but on our terms. The new plan, they would plant a second protocol, more believable, more dangerous, and entirely hollow. If Eleanor delivered it, she'd burn every contact she had left. The sting was clean. Lucas posed as a courier. Ethan, under an alias, arranged the deal. In a hotel room in Warsaw, Eleanor arrived, alone, confident, older somehow. She opened the drive, loaded the files. "What's your endgame?" she asked. The courier shrugged. Eleanor turned and found herself staring down Alexander Morgan. You really thought I wouldn't come?" he asked quietly. Eleanor's mask cracked. "I gave you everything. My life. My loyalty? You sold my legacy for a retirement plan. You were going to die." "I still might," Alexander said, "but I won't do it a coward." Behind him, the boys stepped forward. "You're finished," said Ethan. "No, you don't get to decide." "We're not deciding," Lucas said. "The world already did." Eleanor was arrested that night by international agents. Her buyers fled, and the true Phoenix Protocol, the real one, remained untouched, in the hands of 5 children and 1 man who had nothing left to lose. Dylan watched the latest medical data quietly. Alexander was stable, but there were risks, residual cells, rebound effects. He approached Alexander one evening on the balcony. "We can't stop your death," he said. Alexander nodded. "But we can delay it. And in the time we buy, we can fix the world you helped break." Alexander looked out over the city. The lights seemed softer now, less like a machine, more like a map of possibility. "I'll take that deal." The war came quietly. There were no explosions, no tanks, just suits, lawyers, and quiet backroom votes. After Curtis Lawson's empire collapsed and Eleanor was publicly discredited, a new coalition formed. Desperate, angry, and united by one goal: take Morgan Global back. It began with anonymous lawsuits, then private equity raids, then black budget lobbying in regions where Alexander's name still triggered suspicion. They whispered to investors, "He's lost control," to children. They called it a moral coup. And then came the final blow: a proposed merger. One that would split Morgan Global's assets into sectors and hand them to more responsible hands. If it passed, everything would be gone. Alexander called an emergency session of the full board. The final vote on the merger would be held at exactly 9 a.m. 3 days later. Every director, every legal advisor, every shadow lobbyist, all would be watching. The night before, Alexander did something unexpected. He stepped back. "You lead the presentation," he told Ethan. "I'm not you." "No," Alexander said. "You're better." At exactly 9 a.m., Ethan walked into the boardroom, wearing the same suit he'd worn when first introduced. He stood alone. Behind him, no lawyers, no guards. Only 4 other boys seated in the gallery. The lead corporate representative, a man named Charles Van, adjusted his glasses with practiced disdain. "Let me be clear, young man. This is not a school debate." Ethan nodded. "Correct. It's a funeral. Yours." Laughter rippled across the room, but it died quickly. Ethan activated the projector. What followed wasn't a defense. It was an assault. Slide by slide, he dismantled the narrative. Profit margins since Phoenix had tripled. Employee retention had doubled. Public trust metrics, previously in the red, now ranked Morgan Global above any private institution in the world. Over 700 internships had been created in 9 months, leading to jobs in finance, health, and tech. Experimental cancer therapy trials were underway in 3 countries, all open source, all funded without pharmaceutical partnerships. Then Ethan turned to the board. "You're asking if children can run a corporation," he said. "I'm asking why adults couldn't do what we did." Silence. Then came the surprise. "We're not here to stop your takeover," Ethan said. "We're offering a new one." He distributed the document. The Morgan Accord. Terms: all board members would retain their positions, provided they adopted the Phoenix Charter in their own companies. All profits from Phoenix IP would go into a shared foundation, governed by a council of youth, educators, and ethicists. Any future mergers involving Morgan Global must allocate 25% of resulting equity to community-owned trusts. "This isn't a defense," Ethan said. "It's an upgrade." The board voted. The merger failed. The accord passed, unanimously. Within months, the Morgan Foundation became the largest non-governmental innovation network on the planet. Lucas's urban redesigns were implemented in low-income districts across Europe and Asia. Thomas and Tyler led clean energy hardware accelerators, backed by the restructured supply arms of Morgan Global. Dylan's protocols were now being tested, not just in cancer, but in Alzheimer's and autoimmune disorders. Alexander oversaw it all from a smaller office now. No guards, no assistants, just family. And Ethan, calm, tireless Ethan, was appointed executive director of the foundation. At age 16, the press called it insane. The markets called it a miracle. But to the boys, it was just the plan. A year later, the 5 boys and Alexander stood on the edge of a remote valley in South America. Below them, children ran across makeshift soccer fields. Nurses handed out tablets with interactive courses. Solar grids hummed gently. No cameras, no speeches. "Why here?" Alexander asked. Ethan smiled. "Because this is where the next version of us lives." He turned to the others. "Let's begin again."